One of the things he wanted me to do was go stand in front of the ocean at like 5 in the morning or whatever, 6, 5. It was still dark, and I'd be standing in front of the Santa Monica Pier in the ocean absorbing the waves. And I was to create the power. And the Uzi never really called me Robert. It was always T-1000. As I said before, it was very military kind of training. And he would just sort of come up and tap me on the shoulder, and we'd start running.
It's not about pumping iron or only being fast with weapon. It's a whole mental aspect. It's a mental aspect that you're really learning everything into little details. That gets you the feeling that you're ready for everything that comes up.
What we're doing with Arnold Schwarzenegger in Terminator 2, by giving him this makeup, is assisting him by giving him a little bit more of the character of the Terminator to work with and help him with his performance as the Terminator, so that it's not just, well, let's pretend half of my face is blown away. It's there. Chrome skull on top of Arnold's face, and then skin on top of the chrome skull on top of Arnold's face, and have it finessed enough that it actually did not feel like a big build-up. It stayed very close to his structure and held up. So from a makeup standpoint, that was a major challenge.
We would go to these drawers filled with appliances and pull out whatever we needed for the day. We constantly had to have running lists of what we will need, because the process of making one set of appliances takes half a day. To pour it, to cook it for several hours, to let it cool, then to pull it out at the right time. So if I had to call Stan and say, Stan, we need another dozen sets of stage 4 appliances for Arnold, I would need to give him a week's notice.
43 days I had to sit there for 5 hours each time and wait until those appliances were put on and the wires were put on so the eye lights up. I just remember I had approximately 5 people at one time working on my face and working on my head.
It is a massive amount of work to put appliances on every single day. If you avoid one step, it can save hundreds of hours by the end of the picture. Usually Steve would work on one side of the face, I'd work on the other, and we would do a little do-si-do type of thing, where I would work with one color, he would work with another, and I'd say, you ready? And we would switch. And it really turned out to be quite a practical way to do it. Arnold would come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because we were shooting nights. We would work on him from 3 o'clock until 8:30 at night. He would go out to the set, and we would film until 6 in the morning. He would come back in the trailer once everybody left to go home, and we would spend the next hour taking it off, because you can't just rip that stuff off. It'll tear the skin up a little bit. So you have to be very careful taking it off.
Holy shit.
I need a vacation.
stunt coordinator's role is to actually bring the director's concept of the action to life. You're dealing with the wardrobe to make sure they have the right kind of clothes for certain types of protection. Make sure that the set was right. Make sure that it's padded here, or it braces behind a breakaway wall, or weakened a little bit over here. Make sure there's no slippery surfaces where they can lose their footing. Dealing with the special effects department, telling them what you need, cars built a certain way, what type of explosives you want to use. Stunts and effects work hand in hand. And Tommy Fisher, he's knowledgeable, he's safe. And when it comes to designing rigs, he's done it for so many years that it makes me feel comfortable. The effects crew basically builds anything that you need specialized for a car, for a wreck, explosives and bullet hits. And I'll draw out diagrams. They're saying, well, you can do it this way or that way. This is more expensive, but they'll get better footage, you know. And working with Jim, it's great because it makes my job much easier with a director that understands physics and action. So we did a lot of extensive testing on that to make sure it was going to come out. From casting stunt people to playing parts to casting doubles, it's a 24-hour job, especially on a high-octane picture like Terminator 2.
Mr. Cameron are, very knowledgeable in firearms, and when he wrote the script for T2, he wrote it with these guns in mind. T2 is very realistic. I have never used this many guns in one movie, 20, 30 different types of weapons that was used. The total quantity of the weapon has got to be close to 200s. Stembridge's established since 1918. It's an old firm in the industry, and all we do is just movie guns. They are modified to fire theatrical blanks only, but in terms of safety, always treat them as a regular firearm. Treat them with the proper respect of a live gun, then no one will get hurt. Prop master and his assistant will pass out the safety equipment like face shields, goggles, earplugs, of that nature. I will usually talk to the actor, actresses, or the stuntmen or extras to ensure they know the operation aspect of the firearm. People who does not need to be there are usually asked to leave the set, so we have a safe filming environment.
We had Rubber Patrick come up here, and we painted a little 2-inch by 2-inch grid all over him, and shot him out on the back lawn, walking with 2 cameras that were synced, so I could study not only his front motion but also his side motion, frame for frame. We also took a lot of pictures of him, and we scanned those in as well, and from that I built the skin over top of the actual bones. He was going to be the digital stunt double of Robert. In order to get that detail, right, we should probably scan his head.
Using some equipment that's called cyberware, and what they do is they scan a laser light onto anything you want. It can be a person. In our case, it was a person. It just gathers the data, puts it into the computer, and the computer then puts it together in three-dimensional space.
We now have to take our CG element itself, which is a character, an actor in the film, and make that come to life. We have to bring it to life like a puppeteer would. We have a lot of very talented animators who are able to essentially act through the computer.
What makes it really breathe is the secondary stuff. Mannerisms with the face, mannerisms with the fingers, muscles, all that kind of stuff really brings it to life.
At first, he just sort of rose up very geometrically and stopped, and his head didn't move, and he just sort of stopped and stared. Well, the next time we did it, we decided, okay, we'll have his head rotate a little bit, just the slightest amount, his shoulder move a little bit, you know, that kind of thing. And all those very small amounts of animation, as simple as they may seem, really seem to put the life into it.
But that's what it takes. You have to keep layering detail on top of it, because the real world is very detailed.
We now have to create a computer camera that's the same as the real camera, a computer set that's the same as the real set, and a digital actor that sort of has the same perspective and action and motivation as the actors on the real set.
The CG elements must cast shadows on the scene already in the image. The elements that are in the image must cast shadows on the CG element. If the environment is very shiny, it must reflect the CG element in the environment, so we have to add those reflection components to the picture. Similarly, the CG element itself, if it's shiny, must also reflect the environment.
You create a picture and then wrap that picture around the sculpture. That's called texture mapping.
The biggest problem was dividing up all the shots and sticking them in 5 separate categories. These shots were sort of broken down into the human figure team, the death team, shots that pertain to what we call the pseudopod shots, or polyalloy shots, and digital metamorphosis shots. Every shot poses some problem. Every single shot did, and it posed something completely new.
We were pushing the limits of everything. The amount of disk space we had, the amount of memory we had in the computers, the amount of CPUs we had. Each shot, even though it only lasted 5 seconds on the screen, typically would take about 8 weeks to complete.
A lot of our CG shots did have defects that we never solved, but we could solve them with digital paintwork. They were pretty much done, you know, on a Macintosh and Photoshop. It was very easy working with Jim Cameron on the show. I mean, he really knows just what he wants. He was very clear about what he wanted. He gave tremendous feedback because he's one of the guys around who's able to grasp the technology and then write material for it.
The interesting thing about Cameron is that when he came in here with Terminator in the script, he knew what techniques he was going to use already, and he knew how he wanted to do the shots, even though no one had ever done it before.
It's important for people to realize that what we do is not makeup or special effects or anything that is categorized. What we do is we create characters for film. The process of creating a character is like the process of creating a film. It always starts with the written word. What is the character? What are the characteristics of this character? Second step is to take that written word and create a drawing. Take all the straps off and just say, okay, this is what he's all about. This is what the character looks like. This is what he has to do. Now, how are we going to do that? If you can do it with makeup, do it with makeup. Allow an actor to do it. If you can't do it with makeup, ideally you do it with robotics because it's live. If you can't do it with makeup and you can't do it with robotics, then in comes the magic of the computer. Whatever it takes, that's what we do. From the beginning, whether it was live action or composite photography or stop motion animation or miniature or computer effects, all of those effects were married to Stan Winston Studio effects. There was this wonderful marriage between Stan Winston Studio and ILM that allowed it to be this wonderful seamless blend of techniques, of robotic techniques, of makeup techniques, of computer techniques.
Did that, and then there was just a point where they couldn't deal anymore, and they separated. Oh. Anyway, I can't hide the thing behind the... Here we go, and action!
Jim actually wanted to up the scale. We made the models and the whole environment half again as big as the first time. There is a point in models and miniatures when they get too big, you start to lose the reason why you're doing it in miniature. A set is about 50 feet wide, 30 feet deep, with a sort of forced perspective at the horizon. There's a large area to light. The number of flying and ground HKs involved. Split screening it in with live action, interactive light and missiles and explosions on both sides of the line, both live action explosions and doing tilt down. Particularly since marrying up the foreground and background with explosions going off on both halves, which changes the light and the color on the sets. The same puppet built for the first Terminator is employed again in Terminator 2. That shot was kind of complicated and time-consuming to build. The real trick is to not try to make the entire effect happen all at once. Break it up into component parts. The farthest layer is the miniature background with the flying HK and explosions. That was printed into a rear projection plate. The two images, VistaVision plates, are now rear projected onto a single large screen where we blended the two pictures together and animated in Go Motion that puppet in front of these double rear projection screens. There were 4 backgrounds combined to be 2 and 2 that were shot to end up with 1 and 1. The 2 large endoskeletons. And full-scale set pieces were placed in front of 2 large screens, rephotographed with interactive light and some smoke. Then that went through opticals and we added interactive flashing lights when they were firing the lasers. It's more complicated than you would think to really integrate it, and then no one knows anything was done, and then you've done your job. It was a quarter-scale miniature, which made it 18 feet long. The set was 70 feet long. The asphalt area into the miniature factory building was 20 feet wide. The whole reason why you do some of these things miniature is because you get something that big and that unwieldy. The costs become very prohibitive. When it's smaller, you're controlling it. When you roll it over, you don't have to have a whole brand new thing. You patch it up a little bit and you do it again. And you know that you're going to do it over and over until you get it and work out the details. When it's a full-scale truck, you can't do that.
What we were asked by Jim to do with this nuclear nightmare was to create a tremendous motivation for Sarah. So this nightmare had to be exceedingly powerful, exceedingly realistic, and pretty much punch you between the eyes. Could we make this message so strong that it would really knock people over and make them feel the sense of what this is? Be real about it, not to pretend you could survive it. I've had more reaction to that nuclear war sequence than anything practically I've done on film.
The blast coming across the city was something of a challenge, and we thought about several different ways of doing it. An idea crossed Bob's mind of contacting Jay Roth of Electric Image, who had been developing some animation software for Macintosh. Eventually what he generated was several elements that wound up being incorporated into a matte painting. In addition to that, we inserted a miniature of a building getting blown away that we shot at high speed and did it as a projection directly onto the glass in front of the matte painting.
Worked with several different scales, built a series of metal racks that were the substructure of the buildings, and we covered those with breakaway surfaces. We experimented with a